Have you heard of an auditory processing disorder? That would be APD. Does your child struggle with processing auditory information? Today's guest, Danielle Lindner, shares her daughter's journey in the school system and at home with an auditory processing disorder. You will hear some of the tips and tricks that helped along the way, as well as how her child's auditory processing impacted her ability to learn to read. This is one of those episodes that you'll want to grab a pencil and paper because you might just want to take notes. Does your child have a speech-language delay and you really want them to talk? Do difficult behaviors derail home life and you know the frustration is a communication struggle? Does your child see a speech therapist and you wonder, what do they do and how can I help? If these or similar questions are in your mind, this podcast is for you. Hello, my name is Dinalynn Rosenbusch. I am a speech-language pathologist that has worked with children from birth to 21 for 3 decades. And in my classrooms, I see you wanting to connect with the heart of your child, but their speech and language skills create a barrier. So if you have a kiddo that has difficult behaviors, needs to expand their language or learn to say speech sounds, and maybe even receives speech therapy, stay tuned, because in this podcast, you will learn how to use your daily life as a tool to communication practice and how to do that practice. You will become confident knowing you are making the difference you want to make. And you will hear success stories of parents who have navigated these struggles already. We'll do this all while focusing on building deep, meaningful connection and confidence in your kiddo. So grab a cup of coffee along with a notebook and pen. It's time to speak in the way your child's brain understands. And that is the language of play. Thank you to those of you that came to the coaching office hours yesterday and the webinar last night. It was fabulous to have you there. If you missed it and wished you had been able to be there, go to the show notes where you will see a newsletter sign up, and that way you will be able to hear what is happening at the Language of Play and jump in when you are able. You may also email me at hello@thelanguageofplay.com. Now let's listen to this recorded interview with Danielle Lindner. Welcome back to the Language of Play, listeners. Today we have an esteemed educational consultant in early childhood education and a renowned parenting coach. She is Danielle Lindner, and she's also an accomplished entrepreneur and author. She holds an MA in teaching and in elementary education and is the founder of London Day School, which is a prestigious institution that provides a nourishing and enriching environment for young learners. She has a new book, too, and it is called Parents' Pocket Guide to Surviving the Preschool Years, One Challenge at a Time. And parents, we all know what that is like. So, Danielle, thank you so much for coming to the Language of Play today and joining me for a conversation. Today, we're specifically going to be talking about auditory processing disorders and auditory processing in general. And so thank you for having that be a focus. I am so excited for this topic because difficulties in processing is much, much more prevalent than people realize. So welcome.
Thank you for having me so much.
Yay. I'm glad you're here. So me thinking as a speech language pathologist about auditory processing, you heard me just label disorder on there because that's the realm that I think of it in.
Right.
And you call it auditory processing issues. And of course, a disorder is an issue, but not all issues are disorders.
Right.
So, you're right. And so let's look at it from the perspective of issues. And then I might just pipe in a little bit about disorder. We'll see. But right now, let's talk about what it is and how parents can identify it and what kinds of things they can do.
So I had personal experience with it. When my daughter was in kindergarten, she was reading really, really well, or at least they said she was, but she was really memorizing. And then when she got to first grade, she couldn't read. And I couldn't understand how could she read in kindergarten and not read in first grade. And how was she well behaved in kindergarten, but all of a sudden not a good listener in first grade? And how is everything just, changing so rapidly with just going up a grade? And, kindergarten was a little more, as I say, loosey goosey, a little more play, a little less assessment based. And so they weren't really picking up on the fact that she didn't have auditory processing isn't that you have a problem hearing. So her hearing, if she took a hearing test, that was fine. It was once the sound goes into the brain, it somehow gets jumbled and it doesn't always come out the right way. And often it affects comprehension, and it also affects just their learning and their ability to read. With my often, like you had mentioned disorders, often with auditory processing issues come other issues. My daughter had dyscalculia. It's like dyslexia, but with numbers. She also had ADHD. So a lot of these things kind of piggyback on each other. And I just wanted parents to know that if you are getting, notes from the teacher that all of a sudden your child's not listening, all of a sudden they're being disruptive, all of a sudden they're not paying attention and following instructions, this may be something you want to take a look at. Because it wasn't that she wasn't wanting to be a good listener. She wasn't, the biggest thing, I guess, is ambient noise. So in a classroom with 20 other kids, if there's a lot of noise going on around her, and the teacher is saying, Kelly, can you do this? Can you do that? She doesn't even realize that the teacher is talking to her. So a lot of these kids get labeled behavior issues and behavior problem, when in reality, if the teacher would just get in front of the student and make eye contact and give them the instructions face to face, they would perform beautifully.
I'm glad you said that, because that is huge. And I have episodes, parents, if you're interested in this too, in the show notes, I have some other episodes listed that you can click on that will lead you right to some episodes on processing. Now, Danielle, one of the things you said that teachers can do is get eye contact for the child that is not listening. One of the things that I like to add to that is touch. Does that make a difference for your daughter? Like if you touch her arm, because the touch will cause the attention to shift up at you, and then the eye contact happens, and then like it's neurologically like they can tune in.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The touch. I love that. And also teachers should know that they don't have to scream at the child.
Yeah, louder volume doesn't
louder.
Help,
louder does not help.
It's like when you talk to somebody that's speaks a foreign language and they don't understand you in English. Just say it again in English louder.
Exactly.
It's that kind of thing with processing, isn't it? If they don't process,
and I think the touch too is very calming, because these kids have a lot of anxiety often because they're lost a lot of the time. They're lost in the classroom. So when the teacher comes over and just gives a little tap or a little touch, it makes them feel comforted and like I'm being seen and I'm being heard. Yeah. I think that's really nice.
It's important. It's very important. And I think on a neurological level, it allows our kiddos to tune in. And I say our kiddos because, I work with this too.
Yes.
And so our children then neurologically, they brighten. That's kind of the word that I like to use for it, because there's firing that happens. It's almost like more oxygenation happens. And
I like that.
Yeah. And then that helps with alertness. And it's not just not being alert, is it? It's being able to process. So you did a good job to talk about some of the behaviors that parents and teachers might see that would actually be an auditory processing issue. Can you describe what's happening, for the child? What are they experiencing when they're not processing? Like what happened to Kelly?
Well, for my daughter, she ended up hating reading because comprehension was so difficult for her. Her brain would literally freeze. She would get a panic attack. She would feel like she was falling behind. It was so much anxiety. It was really anxiety provoking for her, because the class would just, continue to go on as at the pace that they want to go without really giving her the chance to catch up, because they didn't really understand what was happening. And eventually, as the years went on and she learned tools that she could use for herself, eventually she was able to catch up herself and tell the teacher, can you repeat that? Could you please write the homework down so I can take it with me so that I don't have to just listen and write it down myself? Could you print it out for me? So she would start to get a little toolbox of tricks and tips for herself. But it takes a long time. And, kids really shouldn't have to necessarily do that themselves. I mean, she struggled for, till high school with this. And then the anxiety just builds and then it falls over into test anxiety and general anxiety. So I think it's really tough for these kids. One thing that we did as a strategy to help her to enjoy reading was to give her books that had a lot of visual clues in it. And that really helped her. Mm. It really helped her. We would give her like graphic novels to read, when she was, you had to read something over the summer, and she needed something with some pictures, and she ended up really enjoying it and really loving it. And she just needed that. It helped her comprehension by connecting the picture to the words.
Sure.
So that was really helpful. And then also just chunking, I would say to her, don't read the whole chapter and then let's talk about it. Let's read 4 paragraphs and then let's talk about it. Because with the processing is slower and the comprehension is tough. So if we would chunk things, it just would lessen the anxiety for her. And it would also make her comprehension scores go, exponentially higher.
Sure. I have a question on that. Well, many questions on that. So a lot of times, there's many kids, not just one child in a classroom that has auditory processing issues. And like many of our disabilities, it's on a spectrum. Some kids have it just a little bit of an issue, and some people have a lot of it an issue, and some kiddos have it actually in the disability range of an issue. So it's a spectrum of skill set. And so your daughter wasn't alone. There were other kids that were somewhere on that field.
Yes.
Did you find that, right? Did you find that there were other kiddos? Did you know who they were? Were you able to help in that way?
So I did not know, but the big clue was that the school decided they were going to put in this special like PA system where the teachers would wear a headset and they had a mic.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, there's no way the school system is putting $1 million into these headsets into every classroom just for my daughter.
Right.
They make you feel like it's just for you, but it's not.
And do you know the reason for that they put the mics in the classrooms?
Well, they were telling me that, by making it louder, it was going to help her to comprehend better and help her to pay more attention. But in reality, it really didn't help her very much.
Oh, it didn't. Okay. Because I think the research does show that when you have an amplified teacher sound, it overcomes that ambient noise.
Yes,
confusion.
it did do that. Yes, okay. It did help with that. If the kids were still in center times and they were all still talking and the teacher had the mic, it didn't help as much, but it did help a lot when there was just a little undercurrent of sound and she could her voice could kind of rise above. It absolutely did help with that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So there's some research, and that kind of thing helps for all children.
Absolutely.
Because really, if you think about it, you and I, if we're in a big theater or something like that, and somebody shouts from the front,
right,
versus somebody speaks in a mic and you have a clear sound coming out, we can hear a lot better too.
Yes.
Another question is in the area of language, because you're talking about auditory comprehension and you're also talking about reading comprehension. And those are different kinds of processing. So auditory processing is that listening comprehension, and reading is reading, it's visual processing. So did your child have trouble with language as a whole, or was language not as impacted as the auditory signal?
I think for her, it wasn't language as a whole, but her reading was impacted because she was missing a lot in the classroom.
Okay, so
she
missing
a lot of instruction from listening.
Okay.
And then that trickled down to math and to reading.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like a big a big, domino effect really for her.
Sure. A lot of kiddos I know with auditory processing issues will also have a language component to it, where they're not processing language. They haven't developed the vocabulary. So therefore, a vocabulary word will be dropped here and there, and then they don't have the language skills to be able to fill in the gaps for the missing words.
Well, she also needed to go for speech therapy.
Okay.
Because her, with the auditory processing, often words aren't as clear as they should be. Okay. So she would go to speech, and in some respects, it really did help her.
Good.
But being pulled out also, it's sort of a catch-22. Then I'm being pulled out of class, and then she was missing half the lesson. So
right.
It's such a hard balance. It's hard for parents, and you just want to always do the right thing for your child. But sometimes you just don't know what the right thing is. And you just have to try a lot of different things and just see what's right for your child in particular, and then advocate for them with the child study team. Because sometimes the child study team isn't always right. They sort of have this floor plan that they use for every single student, and every student's different.
Right. And that is part of the reason that I started this podcast. In fact, that's the main reason that I start, because I've worked in the schools, and you have to start with a framework. You have to start with that floor plan. And then you hopefully can tweak it according to what's the actual, okay, this child is this strengths and these weaknesses and this needs, and this is the support we have. And this is, you have to fill in those gaps or segments of what it is that's going on. And yet you're right. Every child is completely different, and we need to customize for our kiddos that are having some needs. Yeah, that's been quite a journey for you, hasn't it?
It has, but I have to say there's light at the end of the tunnel. She just finished her first year of college.
Good.
On the dean's list. And, we never thought that would happen.
Right.
Not because she's not extremely smart. She really is, but she's an applied learner. She learns by doing. And she's majoring in digital marketing and entrepreneurial studies. And it's a passion, and she's doing great. So you get to the other side. You really do eventually.
Sure. Well, congratulations. That's really exciting. And that is wonderful news. I want to go back just a minute with, you said that she was getting speech therapy, and yes, language and speech are both within that speech therapy setting. Do you know what she worked on? Can you remember this many years out?
Oh my gosh.
Was it words? Was it sounds?
It was words and sounds. Usually the syllables were chopped up.
Okay.
And then she'd have to, it was very funny because once my older daughter was helping my younger daughter go through one of the worksheets, and she would have to say the word, read the word phonetically and then say the word. And my older daughter reads the word and she goes, vacation. And I said, what word is that? And I look at it and I go, Chloe, it's vacation. And she said, oh, I go, you're not helping your sister if you can't read the word properly.
That's funny.
But she was never used to seeing things broken up into syllables like my younger daughter was. I mean, that was like her everyday practice in speech therapy, but not for the older one.
Sure. Yeah. And that is a very good example of a strategy to tell parents, is that when you're teaching a child that has some issues with processing auditory information, we tear apart the words to be able to break them up into the different chunks of auditory information. That would be what they're hearing. And then put them back together, stretch them out, put them together. And then strategies like rhyming and rhythms and all of those things all help our kiddos that have auditory processing issues. So I suppose you had a lot of game kind of homework that way too, didn't you?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah. Yep. That is one of the areas where the homework tends to be a lot, but fortunately it can be games. It can filter into your daily living very easily.
Yes, it's absolutely. And if you just take it with a little humor and look at it with a little fun and make it fun for your child, they're not going to see it as a chore, and it's helping them.
Right. And it sounds like you did a lot of work with her, because she is on the dean's list of her first year of college.
Thank goodness.
So she has come full circle, and you have had a lot of years of working through stuff with her. So kudos to you. Congratulations to you. That's really exciting to me to hear.
And I think also as they get older, the auditory processing lessons for most kids.
You mean the difficulty lessons?
Yeah, the difficulty lessons. And that's definitely, I mean, I'll still correct her. There's times when I'll still correct her pronunciation on words, but it's much better. It's much better than it was.
Good. And are you feeling hopeful for the future?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think as the years go by, more school systems, more teachers start to understand what this is. When 15 years ago, it was relatively new to so many schools. They really didn't understand it. And now I know I'll talk to a lot of adults and they'll say, I think I had auditory processing when I grew up, but nobody knew what it was. They just thought I was a behavior problem, like 50-year-olds I'm talking to. And it's nice now because I do see that they're finally recognizing it, and not so much as a disability, but more as a challenge, that not that the child needs to change who they are, but the teacher has to change how they just approach learning and how they approach teaching for that child.
That's fantastic. And as teachers learn better, they do better too. Because I don't know I don't know any teachers actually personally that don't have a total heart for doing what is best for the child. So I know there's out there because that's what hits the media. But I know a lot of teachers, and I've not met any, that don't have a good heart for their children.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story today, Danielle.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, if parents are wondering about your story and want to talk with you, how would they get a hold of you?
They can go right to my website. It's DanielleLindner.com, DanielleLindner.com. And my book is there, my coaching, complimentary coaching sessions are there, articles are there. That's pretty much my home base.
Sounds good. And I will have that in the show notes, listeners, so that you can go find Danielle and check out her webpage for more help in the area of auditory processing. Now, before I let you go, you also deal with a couple of other issues. What are they?
Anything that has to do with preschool. So I'll help parents with bedtime battles, with tantrums, with teaching children how to transition better, separation anxiety, all those shyness, sibling rivalries, all those things that tend to come out at the preschool level. That's pretty much my wheelhouse.
I love it. And that is also what I have a lot of episodes on too. So we are in the same niche in so many ways. And I love it. And you're a great person to partner with. So I'm really, really glad to have you here on the show. And I know that you have made a change in a lot of people's lives.
I hope so.
Yes, yes. Thank you again for being on The Language of Play. Hey parents, I hope you found this episode helpful. If so, would you please take 30 seconds and share it with a friend who also lives or works with children? I would really appreciate it if you would leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts. I read every review and it lights me up to know that this show is making a difference. Then come join my Facebook community, where you'll meet other parents who are dedicated to helping their children grow too. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me. Now it's time to go. Let's pop our kiddos in the strollers and go look around outdoors and see what we have to talk about.